think of the ecological benefits of the nature that surrounds us, we usually jump to things like butterflies and the soil that we use to grow the food that we eat. And beyond the pretty plants that we see and like, maybe we also think of benefits like their potential for storing excess rainwater and helping to mitigate flooding. But we don't often stop to think about the economic benefits of nature. Sometimes we think of this in terms of the kind of resilience projects that a healthy environment can enable, or taking away the kind of pollution expenses we might imagine. But there are tangible benefits to being surrounded by nature that come down to economic dollars. And it's those tourist dollar benefits that we're talking about on today's show. I'm Weston Twardowski, the Associate Director of Rice's Center for Environmental Studies and the Associate Director of Eco Studio in Rice's Sustainability Institute, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. On today's show, we're talking all about ecotourism. And to start us off, we're talking with Sasha Francis, who is a board member of the Galveston Island Nature Tourism Council and president of the Galveston County chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas. She's also a certified Texas Master Naturalist, and she'll tell us all about Galveston and some of the activity happening there to bolster ecotourism right here in our own region. Sasha Francis, welcome to the program.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Fantastic. Busy day as always.
Sasha, just for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I know you work in all kinds of environmental spaces in Galveston, but especially for this conversation, as we're thinking about ecotourism, can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you first became aware of that idea?
Yeah, so I live in Galveston on Galveston Island, and I've lived here for almost 13 years now. I'm originally from Rhode Island in the Providence area. And so I moved down here for a job at Moody Gardens as a biologist, actually. And I had been working in that kind of space, zookeeper world, for a handful of years before coming here. So I already was very connected to the environment through my profession as a zookeeper, but also just through recreational opportunities as a kid growing up in New England and mountains and, baby mountains up there, but still, hiking and camping and all that. So I already was very interested. But when I moved to Galveston, it is quite a different ecosystem than I'm used to in the Northeast in New England, with kind of mountains and pines and ocean. Here I get the ocean, but also I really grew fondness for the kind of marsh habitats as well, so the wetlands. So when I first moved to Galveston as a marine mammal biologist, I was, working with animals that are not found here at all. Seals, sea lions, penguins, none of those are in the Gulf at all.
Yeah.
But as I started, spending time here in my new home in Galveston, I started to really grow an appreciation for the other side of the island. So yeah, ocean, great. Of course, I love that. That's what I grew up with. But then on the backside of the island in the bay, really starting to notice, native bird species here and what the wetland habitats bring to our ecosystem here. And after working at Moody Gardens for 5 years and continuing on my zookeeping career for a few more years, in 2019, so about 7 years after I moved here, I started working at Galveston Bay Foundation. And that's when I really started to see what was around me and start to gain an appreciation for the wetland habitats, the native plants, the things that I wasn't working with and had no experience really working with. I had to learn about to be able to do education and outreach through my job there. And I really started to just fall in love with all the different unique things that this ecosystem has to offer. So that's kind of what I am into here. And I can tell you a little bit more about kind of my roles in the community too as we go.
Well, I know you have many. I know you got your hands on lots of different things. But I mean, I think when people think of Galveston, of course, the first thing they think of is the beach. Like I think probably more than anything else, especially when folks are thinking about visiting Galveston. And historically, that's been, a major part of, we can think like post Galveston hurricane of 1900, right? Actually, some of the first priorities of city leaders was to rebuild the hotel and rebuild the beach facilities. And so this has been a driver for folks for ages. But I think as much as we assume, oh, Galveston Beach, okay, that's what folks go
Yeah,
for, that doesn't necessarily translate to ecotourism in our heads. So can
right.
you talk a little bit both about, that importance of ecological protection for those resources, but also all of these other spaces you're talking about? Because I don't think as many people think of the marshes of Galveston, and those absolutely draw folks in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think, most people, like you said, they intuitively like, I'm going to the beach because not only is it like a place that you can just kind of go to and see nature, but without having to do much. So I
Mm,
think when people are spending their weekends and they're like, I just want to relax, they can just go pop up a chair, read a book, bring some beverages, and just relax. It doesn't take another activity or another effort to enjoy that space, which is, I think, what draws a lot of people to the beach. Whereas I think it's not as intuitive to think about the other spaces that might require a little bit more effort to engage with to in a way that satisfies what people are looking for. So when I started to kind of open my eyes to the other sides of Galveston, seeing Galveston Island State Park and kayaking there, and really getting into those marsh habitats and seeing the birds and Lafitte's Cove, which is like a little nature preserve here, and actually seeing like a little patch of woods. I was like, we have woods in Galveston? What? I've been missing big trees. With all the loss of so many oaks during Ike, for example, a lot of the main parts of Galveston that people see, they don't see a lot of bigger trees. So they don't get to like kind of be enveloped in the
mhm.
other parts of nature that Galveston has to offer. So I think it's just that, it's a lack of awareness for visitors, which isn't their fault. But when they come down, they come straight on 45, and then they turn right on 61st, and then they go out to the beach, and they're like, okay, I got to stop by the grocery store, or I got to stop by and get toys or whatever. And then that's kind of they just go that T Broadway, 61st, they're at the beach, or they see 25th Street and Pleasure Pier and all that stuff, and they don't really get to see everything else around them because they probably don't know where to go. So I think that's an important part of our jobs as locals is to share with them the other gems we have, because then they're more likely to want to protect it.
Mm,
And of course, there's the balance of, having good places for tourists to stay and visitors to stay so that they can enjoy it and they can give back to our economy here, but also letting them know the big picture. So,
mhm.
what all is here? What all are we taking care of? Because you look at a beach and you go, oh, well, there's not much we need to do there. Just try not to litter. It's there. It's doing its thing. It's not something we really have to keep up with. It's just sand and water, right? But there's so much more to that. There's the dunes. There's the birds that nest in the dunes. There's the native plants that, if you don't really think about it, you might not even see that they're there in the dunes all along seawall. There's these big portions, especially down on the East End Lagoon, tons of native plants. And then the coyotes that are also, especially on the East End and the West End.
Mhm.
There's just so much more to see, and making sure people know the big picture of all the different components that make up this ecosystem, I think will really have people see much more value to it than, just going and popping in a chair and reading their book and having a cocktail and then going back to their hotel. And I think the vast majority of people that do come to Galveston, I think want to know those things. They just don't know where to go or who to ask, you know?
Well, and especially as you're talking, I mean, I think there's certainly the piece that is how do we care for this area. There's also
Mhm.
in Galveston with the seawall. I mean, constant beach refurbishment projects that have to happen,
Mhm.
constantly trying to actually rebuild that beach. I think most folks who go down just imagine it's kind of static and stable and
Right.
don't realize that actually that whole beach has to be consistently maintained
Yeah.
and strategically redeployed essentially because storms come, the coast comes in, the seawall has completely remade the kind of ecological barrier zones that used to exist there. And this is something that
Yep.
again, kind of post hurricane, we can go back and you can look at images of the seawall on the beach from 1910 when it was recently completed, and it's way stretching out, and they're running cars all along it in these races. And about 10 years after, it had already retreated back to the seawall line. And so that beach that we keep seeing there is almost artificial in a way. It has to continually be really concertedly created there.
Right. And it makes me wonder too, like if there were no people on this island and there was no infrastructure on this island, like what would this island look like now?
Mhm.
Like a lot of it would probably be gone from flooding and erosion of just it being a barrier island. Like
Yeah.
its original job and the way that it formed, like any barrier island is like an extra strip of land to kind of break that wave energy and like protect that mainland. But because, people settled here and wanted to live here and stay here, it's like we're fighting this uphill battle constantly of like trying to keep it alive and well
Yeah.
and safe. Um, which is, there's a lot to be said about that, but it is really challenging. And I think people don't think at all about the importance of the native plant component when it comes to like dune habitats and the way that native plant roots are so long that they literally just like hold like clump the sand together and clump the soil together in a way that holds on tight in a way that we can't replicate really, with just piling more sand on and piling more sand on. You have to create that kind of that habitat, that ecosystem to keep it holding on, or else you're just constantly. It's like being in a boat that keeps flooding with water, except it's an island. But we're just trying to like scoop it out. But unless you have something there to like absorb it and create a place for it to go, then you're just fighting an uphill battle forever, which we also run into through our neighborhoods too. Through our neighborhoods that are, become just these little concrete jungles, which the same happens in Houston, as you know. Well, so there's a lot that I think the community has really started to in the last decade since I've been living here about what did I say, 12, 13 years now. I've seen so much growth in awareness in the last even just five, but really over the time I've been here, just so many more people in the community understanding more and sharing this information and sharing this knowledge and pushing for green infrastructure in a way that really helps everyone and everything on the island.
Well, and to that point, I'd love to hear some about what the kind of ecotourism draws people are pushing on the island are. And I know that means both there are other things to see beyond the beach, but also I think you've been involved with some groups that are thinking really specifically about trying to bring people to Galveston to take in all of the array of different natural resources that the island has. So can you talk a little about that work?
Yeah, so I'm on the board for Galveston Island Nature Tourism Council, which is an amazing nonprofit here. And, not only do they offer opportunities for people to go out and engage with these other locations around the island, for example, East End Lagoon, they do like Saturday walks at the East End Lagoon where they walk that boardwalk and talk about the different native plants and the different birds you can see there and what that ecosystem means to the wildlife here. But also, they host Featherfest every year, which is this massive, incredible birding festival. And I haven't always been a birder. I'm still like in my first few years of birding experience and trying to be knowledgeable. But it's an amazing event. And it's very well run. And this is the first year that I've actually gotten in and volunteered to help with field trips and registration. And they've been doing it for quite some time now. So they really know how to do it well. And it's just a wonderful opportunity. You don't have to be a good birder. You don't have to really know what you're looking at all. You can just jump on in and you're with people of all these varying, expertise levels of just learning or really knowing everything. But it's so welcoming and it really is an opportunity for anyone to come out and just be out in nature with people that know that there's stuff to see out there. So it's incredibly fun. They even have like Fledgling Fest, which is for kids. Like I helped host a little tour through the Moody Gardens rainforest for kids to learn how to observe nature, how to observe birds and like talk about how to identify them. And so that is a really cool festival that incorporates a lot of levels of knowledge and really welcomes people in and takes them to all these places that we never knew were here. So takes them to Lafitte's Cove, takes them to the different parts of the West End, takes them over to Bolivar Peninsula and High Island, and all these different little nooks and crannies all across the island and like right outside the island. And that is such a cool opportunity to find these places and experience these places with people that know where you should be looking. And I love that about them. And then they're also very involved in the city, as far as helping support native plant awareness, events for native plant awareness, like pollinators in the park that they do with the city and the farmers market, and just really increasing that knowledge base here in the community and for visitors. So offering opportunities for them to learn more about our favorite parts of the island. So it's a really cool organization that I'm very fond of. And yeah, I think a group of people that are at the forefront of making that connection with the city, with policies, with, permitting and looking to the future of how we can really continue to strike that balance and do better at striking that balance between tourism and development and the habitats here, and really seeing where we can make everything kind of exist in harmony. Because there are a lot of people that visit here that adore it as a place for wildlife and for nature, and they don't come here with the intention of, you know, making a mess or not appreciating it. They come here because they appreciate it.
Can you say a little more about some of those places that if folks are interested in going down to Galveston, what spots should they check out to make sure they get in some of their ecotourism, scratch that itch?
Yeah, I think probably the two easiest outside of the beach, of course, would be Galveston Island State Park,
Mm.
because they also just recently, I think it was last year, the year before, reopened their beach side that has great facilities for easy tent camping. That's like very approachable, especially if you haven't, expert campers and brand new campers alike. They It's a great space for that because they have, some covered picnic tables, they have brand new bathrooms, a little
Mm.
store, so it's really easy and accessible for people to kind of dip their toes into being outside or sleeping outside in the tent on that beach side, which is really cool. And then you can just walk right out their little boardwalk, and they have programming that they do to like teach people about, what do you see in the sand here? And what do you see in the water here? And what are these native plants? So they have programs and educational events. And then on the bay side, same thing. They have educational events and things like that. But they also have kayaking on the bay side, and little boardwalk trails that you can do and paddling trails. And it's very cool, very accessible. So their website has lots of information on the different programs they offer. I think that's kind of a great place to go, where it kind of all in one. If you want to come down and you want to be in nature and you want to learn about nature and you want to take your kids out in nature, or you want to wander around or take your dog, there's great opportunities over there. That's kind of one of the first places I fell in love with, the Bayside of Galveston. And then the East End Lagoon, kind of a newer space as far as access goes, with the boardwalk and signage for what you'll see there, native plants and birds and whatnot. That's another great space that you can go park and, walk the walk and learn while you're there. Those are two very accessible places. And another thing Galveston Island Nature Tourism Council has done the last couple of Feather Fests and kind of building into their program is a program called Birdability.
Mm.
And that was specifically a program created to make sure that birding was accessible to
Mm.
folks with mobility issues. So whether they're, wheelchair users, or they're walking with canes, or they just, have limited mobility as far as like lifting their leg, or they've, had injuries, etc. It's actually making sure that there are nature spaces that are accessible to people. And that's been really cool to learn about, to see in action. I tore a ligament in my knee a couple years back, right before the first Feather Fest I like did a booth at. And it just really opened my eyes to, like, even when you think you look at a space and it's accessible to people, until you're in a position to not be able to lift your leg up one step, you really don't know how inaccessible places are. And so to have somebody like Virginia who created Birdability to be able to really make sure that that's highlighted is I there's so much I didn't know. And I love that we've included that now.
That's
So that's
great.
been really cool. So those are kind of my two. If you're wanting to come down to Galveston, kind of have everything all in one and have an easy way to get out there. I think those are two really, really easy places to go, especially because parking and stuff can kind of be challenging in these other nooks and crannies. Those both have great opportunities for parking. So the other thing too, I think a lot of people don't think about when they're thinking about Galveston is like we're not just the island, right? So we have the ecosystems that we have here on the island, they continue out, whether it's up the bay, everything's connected. And, as we know, up the bay into Galveston Bay, which, Galveston Bay Foundation up 146 here, about 25 minutes maybe north of Galveston, has a property there where they host a lot of educational, walks and trash cleanups and programs and rainbow workshops. And so they have one of the few like publicly accessible stretches of land along the bay. And they have another property too north on the north side of the bay, which is a great way to experience that space. And then when you continue kind of east of here, going over to Bolivar Peninsula and High Island, another beautiful opportunity to see the same kind of ecosystem and the same kind of species here, but just extended into some other locations. And then going out into the Gulf. A lot of people don't realize we have one of the healthiest coral reefs in the Western Hemisphere over here. And Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary is about 100 miles offshore, but there are boating trips that go out there for diving, for fishing, for ways to engage with that part of our ecosystem, which is really, really cool and definitely something people don't think about very often. And that Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary is overseen by NOAA and supported by the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And they do an incredible job at keeping this coral reef healthy, monitored, collecting lots of data, and also supporting some weather data as well through different buoys that we have out there to be able to know what's going on way out there offshore. So that's a really cool opportunity through some different dive charters and fishing charters on our island that you can go check out. So that's another thing people probably don't think about at all.
Great. Sasha
Yeah.
Francis, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Happy to spread some joy and tell people more about this beautiful island we have here.
Now we'll go over to our researcher Jaden, who sits down with my friend and colleague, Dr. Bryan Schmidt, to talk all about an entirely different example of how ecotourism is playing out all around the world.
So, today we're digging into ecotourism, a travel trend that's supposed to be about sustainability and supporting local communities, but sometimes feels more like luxury with a sustainability tagline. One possible example of this is the Envision Festival in Costa Rica, which is part music festival, part yoga retreat, part environmental movement. But can events like this really be eco-friendly? So to explore this, I'm joined by Dr. Bryan Schmidt, a visiting teaching assistant professor at William & Mary. He specializes in theater history, arts management, and performance. So he's the perfect person to help us unpack how events like Envision stage sustainability. So Dr. Schmidt, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So one of the first things I want to talk about is how ecotourism is often described as a responsible travel to natural areas. Travel that not only protects the environment, but also aims to uplift local communities. And it's a growing trend that tries to blend adventure and impact. A striking example is the Envision Festival, which is a 7-day event that combines music, yoga, education, and sustainability. Though it appears it was postponed for 2025, Envision has promoted itself as a model for eco-conscious tourism. Still, one key area of tension is worth exploring. Ecotourism often walks a fine line between genuine conservation and indulgent luxury. At what point does it stop being really sustainable and simply become exclusive? Do you think that luxury environmental experiences automatically undermine sustainability, or do you think the two can really work together?
That's a really good question. To some extent, I would say that I do reflexively think that luxury undermines sustainability. And the reason for that is that as what we call a luxury experience becomes more luxurious, that tends to necessarily indicate that it's also more like energy intensive, that some of that sustainability kind of takes a back seat to creature comforts that help indicate something as a kind of high tier luxury event. But I also would say that I'm not 100% certain that I agree with that perspective, right? And Envision's a really interesting way of thinking about this. So on the one hand, the festival is a place that's primarily catering to international tourists. And I would say though, it's probably ends up being about like 50% international people, mostly from Europe and the United States, also Australia and Israel. But also like about 50% of them are local population. On the one hand, it's a festival. It's electronic dance music. People are there to have fun, get drunk, go crazy, and all the things you do at a music festival. But on the other hand, it really does model itself as an example of using a festival event to try to promote some kind of environmental consciousness. So when you're not dancing to the music, you might go and watch a lecture that's on like indigenous knowledge of conservation, or how to DIY yourself a rain catcher kind of thing. So there are both like technical as well as sort of philosophical aspects that are communicated that relate to eco-consciousness, environmental sustainability, and things like that. And the thing that's hard to quantify is like what people do with their time after the festival. So it's what's called a transformational festival. And the point is that you're supposed to go not just because you want to have fun and rock out, but you're supposed to go because you want to transform yourself somehow. You want to learn these forms of knowledge. You want to kind of set yourself on a better path and pick up things that are not necessarily so easily like skills and knowledge that are not so easily acquired in day-to-day life, especially in the first world. But of course, then you come back to that point of tension. All the kinds of things that happen at the festival that are supposed to both teach you as well as give you sort of experiential knowledge of different kinds of conservational practices, they often like butt up against the fact that for example, there is like VIP camping in the event where, you're still in like a sort of like thatched bamboo sort of structure, something that has a veneer of suggesting a kind of like jungle sustainability and maybe like indigenous lifeway experience, but is ultimately like built through the imaginary and the kind of creature comforts of a luxury experience catered to a first world tourist. And then on top of that, you have the externality of the fact that people fly to Costa Rica to get to the festival. They do certain things like carbon offsetting, but then you get into a larger conversation there as to whether these kinds of consumer-based ways of addressing environmentalism, like a carbon offset, for example, whether that ultimately is the thing that is ultimately working towards like a net neutral policy, or whether that just sort of enables people to say, well, as long as I pay my fee, I can use as much energy as I want. I can do as much environmentally deleterious things as long as I'm sort of paying for it somewhere else. So I think the festival is a great illustration of that sense of like wanting to have your cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
The ability, like if we do it right, we can actually make something that's both enjoyable, fun, allows us to sort of forget our troubles and be tourists, but at the same time feel like we're moving in a positive direction. And that's what I think is really interesting about it.
Absolutely. Something else that I think is particularly compelling about Envision is the range of environmental initiatives that it does support, whether that's regenerative infrastructure and composting systems, and the principles of like leave no trace. This festival also collaborates with local organizations to foster community engagement and environmental education. And so kind of beyond sustainability, it offers workshops on like wellness, creativity, holistic living, which yes, is beyond sustainability, but I think they are often more tied than people give it credit for. But these efforts present a promising blueprint for responsible travel. But can this kind of model work on a broader scale? So we know it's already quite large. I mean, the festival hosts between 6 to 8,000 people roughly. But can sustainable retreats like Envision become more inclusive, or do you think if we continue to expand it, it would undermine more environmental goals?
Well, there's a couple things in there. One is a question of how inclusive it is in the first place, right? On the one hand, part of what enables the whole thing is that you have international dollars coming in that allow the festival to sort of strategically, put resources towards what the kind of principles they want to espouse. What you find if you go there is this really interesting dynamic where the festival is gated off, and they actually use a kind of like wristband scanner for you to come in, which I think is always kind of a little funny because it's like this touch of first world modern technology, but in a festival that tries like aesthetically to kind of cater to a pre-modern sensibility. But then what's even more interesting is on the outskirts of the festival, basically there's a pathway that leads from the festival grounds to a public beach. On the public beach, you have locals in the community who definitely cannot afford to go to the festival, but they use the opportunity of people coming in to be able to sell on the beach, little trinkets or food or what have you. And then on top of that, there's also this whole community that sort of builds up on the pathways down to the beach. They're selling things, but they're also like bringing their families along because they need to essentially pool communal resources in order to cost efficiently make money off of these festival goers. And then the irony of the whole situation is that if you go inside the festival, the same kinds of trinkets can be found, but at this huge markup because they're seen as being part of this artisanal economy. And this again comes back to maybe your previous question about luxury and sustainability. The artisanal economy is also, I would say, a nod to a sense of conscientious living and intersects with the eco-consciousness sensibility. But at the same time, it also is sort of something that relies on the excess of a materially wealthy clientele to be able to support. So there's those kinds of things, as well as the fact that the place around Envision has really transformed itself quite a bit to cater to the festival economy. And so on the one hand, the festival does do a lot to sort of reach out to the local community to say, number one, are there problems that are being created here by this festival and how can we address them? Can we use the profits that the festival makes in order to make investments in this community and sort of, better outcomes for everyone? An example is they invested money to make a series of like water pumps. And the real reason the festival did this, I think, is because they needed to reliably have water available for them at the festival each year. But at the same time, it is an ongoing resource that can be used in the community. And there are things related to education, things related to nonprofits and things like that, that the festival really does earnestly do because that's where their principles lie. But there's also this whole thing of like, for example, the festival has specific partnerships with certain taxi companies. And if you are a local person who just wants to use your car in the informal economy to taxi someone to and from the festival, you can actually get in trouble for it. I don't know if it's just a ticket or if it's something else, but like the point is that the festival kind of controls that kind of economic outcome. Furthermore, there are also now in the year, it's been going for like a little bit over a decade, I think. The towns where it's near, Ubita and Dominical, they are increasingly like sites for international tourists year round. So the kinds of businesses that pop up are like yoga sustainability retreats, hostels, bars, like kind of, and not just like your any old bar, but like I would also often go and see like random bands that I'm from Ohio, bands that I would go see in Ohio are like playing at the bar in Dominical. So the point being that it's clearly geared towards the international community, the expat community who's going there. Sometimes that's during the festival, and the festival itself, one other thing I wanted to mention too, to your question about like, is this sustainable on a broader scale? A festival is necessarily temporary, right? And so that's also, I think, part of what enables it to be as compellingly eco-conscious as it is that you know that you only have to really maintain that that look and appearance for the 7 days of the festival. But beyond that, the festival kind of spills out from that time frame further. There's about a month of preparation to put up the festival, and people will fly in just to be kind of part of the community that makes the festival happen. And there are definitely like this is not just sort of crassly like I'm here to party an extra month longer. I think people actually make relationships, they create local community partnerships. Oftentimes friends of mine who have gone to this festival have taken the relationships they've made there and tried to build that into a more permanent kind of thing, whether that's a business proposition or an annual trip or just, friendships and relationships. But when you take all of this on a longer scale, I think that what you see is a lot of transformation in that community. It becomes more of a tourist area, it becomes more of an expat community. And that's both, temporary things like people bringing their money in as tourists and doing tourist things, but increasingly there's land that is owned by international consumers or conglomerates, businesses that are started to cater to that community. And at some point, it becomes a question of whether the local population can actually like keep up with the international development that is happening there. And then to bring it back to eco-consciousness and environmentalism, all of this is still within the grammar of an ecological matrix. Like people, one of the reasons Costa Rica is such a compelling site is because the country has done so much to position itself as a leader in environmental activism. And so whether or not it's like a local person doing a kind of self-starting activist action, or a international firm that sees money in leading like jungle retreats and things like that, all of it is still framed through like eco-conscious principles. And so there's a principle that a scholar named Jim Butcher calls the moralization of tourism, right? How people make their trip to an international space hold a sense of like moral weight and social value. Like I'm doing this trip not just to have a good time and unwind, I'm doing it to make a difference. And that might be a difference personally and like transformation, or I want to change this community for the better. I want to bring resources so that the community has a chance to develop, things like that. But all of this works within that grammar, and it's a noble grammar, right? To think that you're trying to do something positive with your like sort of leisure time, but at the same time, I don't know that it's something that I don't know that it necessarily does what it says, and I certainly don't know that it's like sustainable over a longer duration or a longer term. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned this festival bringing in things to the local community that everybody could use year round beyond the festival.
Mhm.
But with that, as you've mentioned, oftentimes bringing international travel can harm the community sometimes, because they're not able to maybe afford certain things after if you have a lot of people moving, or just increases the prices of everything. So you also mentioned that inside the festival, you can buy the same things that you could buy outside of the festival. In future versions of this festival, do you think it would be possible to kind of get rid of the things you can purchase inside and just make it so it's community based and everybody's buying things from the local community? Or is that a little far-fetched to happen?
Yeah, that's a little tricky. I don't know to what extent you would call the like artisanal economy in the festival central to what is compelling about the event. However, like a lot of my research is on the festival culture more broadly, and vendors are one of the sort of central things that you have at any festival. It's even like it's more of an aesthetic thing, I think, than it is about like the actual things that are sold. Because I would actually say most of the things that are sold are really like are artisanal, like artist pieces in nature. People buy like cool outfits and things that they want to wear at the festival, but they might also actually, one of the really interesting things at Envision is they have an art museum that they set up. With both a combination of like local and international artists, and it's all very like psychedelic art. It's stuff that would look really cool if you're taking drugs and listening to music at the same time, that kind of thing. And so there's a way in which the vendor economy, I think, is part of the aesthetic that they're creating. And also, like they call I forget what they name, they have like a little pet name for the central market area that sort of sounds very like old timey, like the central village or something, but you know, part of what's going on there is building a kind of like infrastructure that has the look and feel of like a sort of fantasy jungle town, like as if you were building a jungle village in Minecraft or something like that. So I'm not an architectural expert, but this seems to be more through the imagination of like Hollywood depictions of, treehouse villages, Swiss Family Robinson kind of thing, than probably what is true to like pre-modern cultures from the area. But the point being that I don't think it's sort of just a matter of getting rid of the product, so only like locals sell there, because it's a wider question of like what compels people to travel to this event. And in the same way, like some people are going to go because it's that EDM artist that they really like. Other people are going to go because they can kind of convince themselves, well, I really want to go to this particular lecture with this person. Or other people will go because they want to see the event production, right? Like the fact that it's not just like another example of this is one of the stages at the festival. One of the years that I went, they always have very exciting, extensive stage shows, right? And the architecture for how they build each stage is sort of an art piece in and of itself. So this artist, who is a US based artist, created a stage decoration that was based off of the local indigenous culture is the Baruka tribe, and they have a wooden mask making tradition. So they put one of these like models of a Baruka mask gigantified on the stage. So this qualifies generally as like event production, and it references the local space, even though it's an American artist who creates it. And what I'm getting at is that there's this kind of mix of whether you're there for exposure to a new place, a new system, new people, or whether you're kind of there more to experience the luxury of the world that you're used to, but in a different kind of aesthetic, a different environment. So yeah, I don't think that there's an easy fix here in terms of like, if the festival would just get rid of the particular material economy that's maybe most obviously exclusionary. The whole thing functions like there's a gate, and it's patrolled and things like that. Like it's exclusionary fundamentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never a very simple fix in anything. So I would expect the same thing here. But so the last thing I want to touch on is we've kind of been hinting around it, but with this rise in high-end ecotourism, we have luxury resorts and we have curated green adventures. And in a sense, Envision reflects that trend as well. You mentioned offering the VIP packages, private transportation, exclusive experiences, but the full experience comes at a rather steep price, often limiting access to only wealthier travelers. As you mentioned, a lot of the even local community members who don't have to fly in can't go. So while this exclusivity might fund certain sustainability measures. I understand sustainability is rather expensive, so if we made it very inexpensive, I highly doubt it would be able to achieve a lot of the goals it sets out to do. But is it more so turning this into a privileged escape rather than simply promoting more sustainable travel habits? So have you come across any travel experiences like Envision or Envision itself that felt genuinely both sustainable and inclusive? Or do you think that most of these efforts are more about marketing, exclusivity, and the idea of sustainability rather than real impact?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question. I wouldn't say that there's something that I've personally found that I'm like, that's the thing. That's actually they're actually doing it right, that kind of thing. I'm much more like interested in the places where contradiction and friction kind of emerge. But at the same time, maybe part of my characterization here has been a little bit a little bit unfair to Envision as well, because one of the things I think that they do try to disassociate from is from like the mass tourism industry, right? They are sort of acknowledging that, tourism in general is very like energy intensive. It usually is an imprint of the tourists' culture on the local community. It's often like definitely environmentally unsustainable. And so really what I think Envision tries to do is create an alternative to like the mass tourist experience. And on the one hand, like it doesn't necessarily easily resolve some of those contradictions. But there are two things that I think are kind of special about what they do. One is they really put a lot of emphasis on the notion of communal contact. You're going to meet people from the local area. You're going to meet middle-class Costa Ricans as well from the capital city, from other urban spaces in Costa Rica, and so to some extent, I think I also kind of end up oversimplifying by characterizing it as like the first world tourists and the like not first world local community.
Mhm.
But that's really there's quite a diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds kind of represented there. And just as like somebody is a trust fund baby from the first world, like other people are kind of gutter punks or hippies who scrounge together whatever money they have to do this because it's the thing that they believe in.
Mhm.
And so there's a way in which there's a premise of the festival, which is that if you connect person to person in a live, co-created environment, there's something positive that comes out of that that you can't get from a sort of pre-packaged tourist experience to Costa Rica. And, I know tons of people who have gone on like jungle walks or volcano tours and things like that. And certainly I imagine that sustainability is a part of how those experiences are marketed and how they're imagined. But what I think Envision really believes is that by like being in this kind of like peak experience, by being kind of in a crucible of an event where you meet people and you kind of live intensely for a period of days, that allows kind of personal transformation to happen in a more felicitous way than what's typical. Yeah, shoot, there was one other point I was going to make on this, and I seem to have lost it. Your question was again about whether there are experiences that kind of do what they say.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, I think the other thing I did want to mention here is that there really is a very strong base of knowledge and passion amongst the people who are the most fervent supporters of not just this festival, but I think a lot of different events. What I've seen is this rise over the last 15 years of ways to kind of communicate knowledge and teach on a kind of grassroots level basic principles related to permaculture, eco-consciousness, indigenous knowledge, things like that, that I do think are kind of core bedrock to making positive environmental change. But I often think that the possibilities for education in those fields are either you're kind of going on YouTube and doing it yourself, you're going to college, and that brings into a whole other, like, material economy of like who can afford college, who gets to go. So there aren't a lot of ways in which people have tried to imagine like a kind of like more grassroots activist level. And it is a little ironic then to come back to like a festival that people probably pay $200 to $300 just for the ticket plus for the flight itself. Like it's not a small investment to choose to go to this event. But I do think that there's something there in terms of like people, really earnestly wanting to practice what they preach. And the fact that they can't necessarily see all of the contradictions that are embedded with that, I don't think is like I'm intentionally turning a blind eye to it. It's just that the issue is pretty complex. And as soon as you do put your finger on like, this is the thing that's a solution, you can immediately find a way of undermining the same kind of argument, I think. So yeah, I mean, I guess my jury is still out on like something that is more, felicitous to the whole experience, but I would be remiss if I didn't actually put in a good word for the folks there.
No, absolutely. And it seems really interesting, and compared to so many other excursions that one can choose to do around the world, this definitely seems far better than most. So I, by no means saying don't go or this is bad, but just wanted to discuss that sometimes it's very difficult to say, like, it's very easy for us to say this is very sustainable or it's not. And it's very difficult to talk about, well, it's really a lot more complex than that.
Totally.
Thank you so much for joining. It's really been such a pleasure. And I think this conversation will help some people think about ecotourism a little bit differently.
Well, thanks so much. Happy to be here and excited to see how this conversation evolves.
Me too. Thanks.
That's our show for this week. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081. That's 713-348-4081, or email us at westonT@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Co-produced by Joseph Campana. Audio engineer Rico Enriquez. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce, Sophia Soltes, and Evan Rinsdorf. Stay tuned for No Expectations with Marcus French here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.